There's a realization that doesn't arrive when you fail. It arrives when you succeed. When you finally build something stable and realize you don't feel what you expected to feel. Not disappointed, not unhappy, just strangely neutral. And that neutrality is harder to understand than failure ever was. This is that realization. For years, you moved towards something, a goal, a level of stability, a version of life that feels sorted. You imagine that when you arrive, everything will feel different, lighter, clearer, more satisfying. So you work, you adjust, you tolerate, because arrival is supposed to justify the effort. Then one day, you're there. Not perfectly, but close enough. Things are stable, functional, secure. And instead of relief, you feel something subtle. Silence. No surge. No deep shift. No internal confirmation. Just continuity. Life keeps moving the same way it did before. This is confusing because you expected contrast. You expected a visible difference between before and after. But the transition was gradual. You adapted along the way, adjusted expectations, normalized progress. So when you finally arrived, there was no emotional spike left. You had already absorbed the change step by step. Goals don't transform identity. Process does. By the time you reach something, you've already become the person who can handle it, which means arrival rarely feels dramatic. It feels earned, integrated, expected. An expectation removes intensity. The realization doesn't happen immediately. It happens when you pause long enough to ask yourself, is this what I was chasing? And the answer isn't no, it's just unclear. You realize you were focused on reaching something without ever checking what reaching would actually feel like. Neutrality feels unsettling because it doesn't match the story you told yourself. You told yourself this would matter deeply, that it would change something internally, but it didn't. And that forces a harder question. Was I chasing the right thing? Or was I chasing movement? That question arrives late. Adaptation makes everything survivable. It also makes everything ordinary. You adapt to stress. You adapt to growth. You adapt to success. So even milestones become routine quickly. Not because they lack value, but because your nervous system normalizes them. And once normalized, they stop feeling transformative. This realization doesn't mean your effort was wasted. It means meaning was never stored in the arrival. It was stored in the becoming. And becoming is gradual. So gradual that you don't recognize when you've already changed. You only notice that the emotional climax never arrived. Most people don't feel empty because they failed. They feel confused because success felt quieter than they imagined. And quiet doesn't match the narrative they built in their head. So they assume something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. They simply misunderstood where meaning lives. Arrival is rarely loud. It's subtle, integrated, almost invisible. By the time you reach something, you've already adapted to it. So the transformation happens slowly, not at the finish line. And that's why this realization comes later. Not when you arrive, but when you notice that arrival didn't feel like arrival. If this resonates now, it probably wouldn't have before. Because before, you were still moving. Some realizations don't arrive to correct your path. They arrive to explain why the finish line felt quieter than expected. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because meaning was never waiting there. It was happening the entire time. And only later do you understand why the moment you were waiting for never felt dramatic at all.